Hello and welcome to the Dustin and Eric podcast show brought to you by Mimosa Networks. Hi, I'm Dustin.
And I'm Eric.
Today we're on episode number 36. Right?
What's in store? 36. Check.
Wow, this COVID stuff being long, it's hard to keep track of what's going on anymore. Hopefully we're on the downhill slide of this, though. I got my first COVID injection this week. Eric, have you gotten any of yours yet?
I received number 2 a week ago.
Oh,
and
I
had a heavy bruise here.
I didn't have a bruise, but my arm was really sore for a couple of days. Like somebody punched the heck out of me or something. But it's all good now.
Maybe somebody did. Remember when you blacked out?
Somebody's active in your background.
I think my brother's here.
Oh, Lord. We'll bring him on in. We'll have a special guest on this episode. But anyway, this week's episode, we're going to talk about Wi-Fi interop mode and using third-party clients with Mimosa access points. Seems to be a common topic coming in on our YouTube videos, so we figured we'd just go ahead and cover that. So, Eric, because you do support chats most of the time, what's the most common clients people ask about when they're wanting to do Wi-Fi interop mode? Like what brands?
I'd say Ubiquity. Like it's important to have compatible, antennas that made up. Like if you've got a Mimosa C5C, just make sure the RF jumpers are there. And I think one of the most compatible is like Ubiquity RD30s, 34s.
Yeah.
But one thing, if you use those, you really have to watch the design frequency range. Some of these are limited to say 5100 to 5800 or so. And if you operate just below or above, that performance rolls off pretty big. So we do have some other third-party antennas that folks use.
Yeah, I think another common one would be MikroTik. MikroTik's pretty common. There's especially overseas, MikroTik is pretty common in people's networks because they don't really believe in following regulations. So people can use 6 gig or 4 gig and make it work out. So like Eric said, just make sure that the antennas connected to your clients are applicable to the frequencies you're trying to use on the Mimosa AP. So in the Mimosa AP, of course, you need to have it set to Wi-Fi interop mode. In the clients, you need to make sure they're also set to Wi-Fi mode or Wi-Fi interoperability mode. It's probably labeled a little differently in each of these radios. I'm not super familiar with the MikroTik or the Ubiquity radios anymore, but I don't know, Eric, have you had anybody come in the chat, asking about setup and, what do you need to set up in the A5C and what do you need to set up in the third-party client to make this work?
Yeah, one of the main things is you want the same protocol like you mentioned. So you want a Wi-Fi interop if you're going to take a Mimosa AP with a non-Mimosa third-party client. So that's going to need to be the same. You're also going to need to see if you're on the client side. You're going to need to see a signal. If you scan for ID, you're going to want to see I see a common negative 81 dB threshold. If it's negative 81 or weaker, you're not going to link up to the AP. It's going to need to be better than that and have the right credentials, etc. for the link to associate.
Right. So another thing that you have to do is you have to manually set the distance, at least in the A5, because they don't actually speak the same language. They're not on the same firmware. So the A5 or the A5C doesn't really know how far away this client is. So for it to transmit correctly, you need to set the distance in the A5C. And if you have the option, also set the distance in the client radio. That way, you have the least amount of packet loss and least amount of retries on, transmissions. Also, you should try and enable RTS or CTS, which is request to send and clear to send for all packets. So you need to set this threshold to 0 and verify the feature is not turned off. And then, of course, after you do all this, it doesn't hurt to reboot either. Rebooting, as always, IT's number one go-to when something doesn't work right.
And right. And I'd set, we like to set the channel bandwidth from the AP narrow. I don't know how you feel on that. Do go as narrow as you can for starters, and have those clients connect up. Bring them on in with at a narrow bandwidth. Get some spectral density there instead of going wide and then pinging out and looking for clients to bring on in and associate.
Right. Another thing to note is that using Wi-Fi channels, there's only certain channels you can pick from. In SRS mode, you have the whole selection from 4.9 up to 6.4, depending on where you're located at to choose from. Wi-Fi mode only has, channels 1 through 11.
Yeah.
Or, well, not 1 through 11 because that's 2.4, but 5 gig Wi-Fi channels.
Yeah, around 5180 to 5825 in
Right.
there, I believe. Yeah.
But if you enable extended frequency use, you can choose other channels in between the normal Wi-Fi channels, but your clients have to be able to support that as well. They have
Right.
to have extended frequency or, additional frequency support. If they're just standard, 2, 4, 5 gig Wi-Fi, radios, they're not going to connect to any channels other than, the standard Wi-Fi channels.
Right. Little center sliver or section
So
there.
that's just a tip.
Yeah.
If your clients aren't connecting, make sure you're on a standard Wi-Fi channel.
How about expected distances? Of course, that depends on the gain at the AP. Is it a sector? Is it an omni?
Mm-hmm.
Using an omni, Mimosa omni, or using a HANA wireless omni on that A5C? What's the TX, the bandwidth? What's the gain on the client side, and so on?
So theoretically, Wi-Fi interrupt mode will allow you to go further than SRS mode because
Yeah.
SRS inherently has a 25-kilometer cutoff. And for those of you who might be familiar with my very first video with Mimosa, where we did the 56-mile link over Monterey Bay, that was with an access point and a client in Wi-Fi mode, doing 56 miles. But of course, that required special firmware and it wasn't extremely stable. So it goes back to what Eric just said. It depends on the gain of the client antenna. It depends on the gain of the AP antenna. So if you want service that works, you probably want to try and keep it under 10 miles.
Yeah.
Most of our deployments, most of the customers out there are doing micro pop deployments anyway, so you wouldn't be going over a couple of miles at most. You're picking up homes that are nearby, not homes that are like 20 miles away. You'd be doing more of a point-to-point shot with that or something.
We are seeing, lots of people will take an A5C and an N5X45, a 4-port 45 degree Mimosa sector, and then they might have a C5C with an RD34 on the end, and they're looking at, can they squeeze 8 and 10, 11 miles out of it? Some can. That all depends case by case, but typically, like you said, you're looking at a quarter mile, 2, 3, 4, 5 miles is a good upper average. 5, 6 good upper average, I would say, depending on both sides. Yeah.
And I think the most important thing here is people want to know what kind of speeds to expect. So Wi-Fi interrupt can provide you with much higher speeds than SRS mode, but it depends on the amount of clients you have connected, depends on the distances of the clients, and how much bandwidth the clients are using. So in Wi-Fi interrupt mode, there is no time slots. People, or radios, I should say, can use as much bandwidth as they want, which leaves little to no bandwidth for some other customers.
Right.
SRS mode, of course, has time slots. Everybody gets, an even chunk of transmission time. So if you have a few customers on an access point, you could potentially see, up to 400 megabits per second download speeds, maybe even more. But again, that comes back to how many customers you have, how many customers are actively using the connections, and so on and so forth. We can run around and keep saying this all day long. So
yeah, that's a common.
So Wi-Fi is good
common
in
question.
certain
Yeah.
cases, but we always would recommend you
Yeah.
ultimately moving to SRS mode with all Mimosa clients on your access point.
Right. And of course, co-location. You got a couple APs living together on the same tower on the same rooftop or whatever. That's a big deal too, and that goes back to what you're saying about timing and timing slots and stuff.
Right.
So, and throughputs on the end at the end user, the client, the CPE. What's going to happen? So, yep.
Yeah, there's no GPS synchronization with Wi-Fi mode either. You're going to have to
There
use
you go.
different channels on each AP. So if
Yeah.
you've got a bunch of different APs on the tower, you're going to have to fit that in somewhere. You can't overlap
Mm.
channels without causing yourself problems. So there's always pros and cons to Wi-Fi mode. There's always pros and cons to SRS mode. But ultimately, I think SRS mode is the more stable mode. But some people like Wi-Fi interrupt mode. We've got plenty of customers out there who use Wi-Fi interrupt mode, and
Yeah.
they mainly use Mimosa clients, but they also have Ubiquiti or MikroTik clients.
Hmm.
Um, any radio that can do Wi-Fi interoperability mode can connect to the A5 or A5C if it's set up correctly. So it's not just limited to Ubiquiti and MikroTik, but those are the two most common ones. Eric, do you have anything else to add to this topic?
I think that's it. Again, if you're looking for other antennas to connect to a Mimosa AP or a Mimosa, C5C, etc., just look at the design frequency for that particular antenna. Also, make sure the genders you're using short jumpers and it's a quality RF 50 ohm cable. Make sure the genders just right is the correct, and then you can connect the dots. But really look at the design parameters, because again, if you go below or above that design frequency of that parabolic reflective or that omni or whatever you're using, performance rolls off on these microwave frequencies big time. So,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. Well, one more
Did
thing
you have a
before. Oh,
WISPA? Were you're gonna mention Texas? Were you?
I
Or
was. Go ahead
okay,
and mention it. You started
you
right
mentioned
before I
it.
did, so.
No, I only know what's on the screen over here.
Oh, well, one
You
last
go.
thing is, WISP America is coming up next week. It's going to be in Grapevine, Texas, which is right there in Dallas, right near the airport, right near DFW, basically across the street from DFW. It's going to be, April 26th or 29th. So Mimosa will have a booth there. Um, this will be the first show that I have missed in, probably 10 years. I unfortunately won't be there this time, but we will have a booth there, so feel free to stop by and say hi. I hope to see everybody in Vegas, in October. Hopefully, COVID will be bye bye, or close to bye bye. Everybody will have their shots and travel will be opened up, and so on and so forth. So I won't see you unfortunately next week, but other people will, and then I will see you all in Las
Yeah.
Vegas in October.
Hey, you might do 6 feet social distancing while you're working your luggage around the airport, but then you're going to do 6 inch social distancing once you're squeezed next to your unknown neighbor. Okay.
Right. Yep.
Just be safe.
All right. Well,
All right.
thanks, Eric, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Mimosa podcast.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe or follow button to stay up to date with our latest podcast, which will be available on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud.